What if I told you that Rome never truly fell? That the greatest empire in human history, the civilization that built roads stretching across 3 continents, that gave the world laws, architecture, language, and order, did not collapse under the weight of barbarian swords or mad emperors, but under something far quieter, far darker, and far more familiar? What if the real story of Rome's end is not a story of defeat at all, but a story of a civilization that slowly, deliberately chose to stop being itself? Today we are going to travel through centuries of glory, corruption, and silence to uncover the truth that most history books skim over or ignore entirely. This is not just the story of an empire, it is the story of how power, when left unchecked, becomes its own executioner. How wealth creates the very conditions for poverty. How the most advanced civilization the ancient world had ever seen looked into the mirror and did not recognize what stared back. So sit back, because what you are about to discover goes far beyond the date 476 AD that your teachers circled on a chalkboard and called the end. Because that date was not an ending. It was just the last page of a story that had been dying for over 300 years. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which other fallen civilizations you would like to explore. Let's dive in. Historians of mystery, imagine a city at the center of the known world. A city of marble and fire, of senators and slaves, of triumph and terror. A city so powerful that its name became synonymous with civilization itself. That city was Rome, and for nearly 1,000 years, it was untouchable. But how did something so mighty break apart? And more importantly, why does no one agree on the answer? To understand the fall, we must first understand the rise. Because Rome did not become an empire by accident. It became one through a combination of ruthless military discipline, extraordinary administrative genius, and a radical idea that was centuries ahead of its time. The idea that conquered peoples could become Roman. Not slaves, not subjects, Romans. When Rome absorbed a new territory, it did not simply extract its resources and move on. It built roads, established courts, installed aqueducts, and extended citizenship. It created loyalty not through fear alone, but through belonging. At its peak under Emperor Trajan in 117 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Scotland, from the coast of Portugal to the banks of the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq. It governed an estimated 70 million people, roughly 1/4 of the entire world's population at the time. It was, without question, the most sophisticated political machine the ancient world had ever produced. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to rot from the inside. But here is what your textbooks never told you. The fall of Rome was not an event. It was a process, a long, agonizing, deeply human process that unfolded across centuries and had not one cause, but many, each feeding the others like kindling in a fire that no one had the courage to put out. So let us go through them, one by one, because the truth is far more complicated and far more terrifying than any barbarian with a sword. The first crack appeared not on the battlefield, but in the treasury. Rome had built its empire on conquest, and conquest was expensive. Legions had to be paid, borders had to be defended, infrastructure had to be maintained. For centuries, the spoils of war covered those costs. Every new territory meant new gold, new slaves, new tax revenue. But by the 2nd century AD, Rome had reached the natural limits of its expansion. There were no more easy conquests. The legions were no longer bringing wealth home, they were consuming it. To cover the growing deficit, Roman emperors did something that would feel remarkably familiar to anyone living in the modern world. They debased the currency. The silver denarius, Rome's primary coin, contained roughly 85% silver during the reign of Augustus. By the reign of Gallienus in the 3rd century, that figure had collapsed to less than 5%. The coin still said denarius. It still carried the emperor's face, but it was worth almost nothing. Prices exploded. Trade became unreliable. Farmers and merchants, unable to plan for the future, began to abandon the market economy entirely. What followed was a slow retreat back into localized subsistence farming, a step backward that would take Europe centuries to reverse. The economic heartbeat of the empire was faltering, and almost no one in power wanted to admit it. But economic decay alone could not kill Rome. What accelerated the collapse was a political crisis so severe, so sustained, that it makes modern political dysfunction look almost harmless by comparison. Between 235 AD and 284 AD, a period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, Rome cycled through no fewer than 26 emperors in just 49 years. Most of them did not die peacefully. They were assassinated, executed, or killed in battle, often by the very soldiers who had placed them on the throne. The Roman Senate, once the backbone of the Republic and a stabilizing force in the early empire, had been progressively hollowed out, its power stripped away by decades of autocratic rule. What remained was a political system built not on institutions, but on personality. And when the personalities kept dying, the system convulsed. Think about what that means for a civilization. Imagine trying to maintain roads, collect taxes, coordinate border defense, and manage a supply chain spanning 3 continents when your head of government changes on average every 2 years. Governors stopped receiving clear orders. Generals began acting independently. Regional commanders discovered that loyalty to a distant, unstable emperor was worth far less than loyalty to a local warlord who could actually pay and protect them. The empire did not break apart in one dramatic moment. It fragmented, slowly and quietly, like a spider web developing new cracks with every passing season. And then came the military crisis. And this is where the story becomes deeply ironic, because the very solution Rome chose to solve its border problems ended up accelerating its disintegration. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, Rome was struggling to recruit enough soldiers from its own citizens to defend its vast frontiers. The old tradition of Roman men serving in the legions as a civic duty had faded. Urban populations were more interested in bread and circuses than in military service. So Rome did what pragmatic empires often do. It outsourced its defense. It began recruiting heavily from Germanic tribes, the very peoples it was supposed to be defending against. These soldiers, known as federati, were skilled fighters. They were often loyal, at least for a time. But they were not Roman. They did not share Roman values, Roman language, or Roman political traditions. And critically, their loyalty was to their commanders, not to Rome itself. This created a devastating paradox. The more Rome relied on foreign soldiers, the less Roman its army became. And the less Roman its army became, the less capable it was of defending the idea of Rome, as opposed to simply defending whoever happened to be paying them that month. When Alaric and his Visigoth forces sacked Rome in 410 AD, an event that shocked the ancient world into silence, many of the soldiers who failed to stop him had themselves been Germanic warriors in Roman service just years before. Rome had, in a very real sense, been defeated by an army it had trained, but we still have not reached the deepest layer of the collapse. Because beneath the economics, beneath the politics, beneath the military dysfunction, there was something even more fundamental corroding. The Roman identity itself. This is the part that no one talks about. Because it is uncomfortable, because it sounds philosophical rather than historical. But it may be the most important factor of all. Rome at its peak was defined by a set of shared values: civic duty, the rule of law, the idea that the individual existed in service to something larger than themselves. These values were not just abstract principles. They were the operating system that made the entire machine function. When senators debated in the forum, when magistrates enforced contracts, when engineers built roads through mountains without being asked twice, they were all running on the same operating system, and that operating system began to crash. By the late Empire, civic participation had become a burden rather than an honor. Wealthy citizens, who in earlier centuries had funded public buildings and games as a demonstration of civic pride, now used their wealth to buy exemptions from public service. The middle class, crushed by inflation and taxation, collapsed downward into dependency. The poor, stripped of economic opportunity, became entirely reliant on government grain distributions. A society that had once been held together by participation was now held together only by coercion and habit. And habits, as Rome was about to discover, can break. The philosopher and historian Edward Gibbon, writing in the 18th century, famously argued that Christianity played a significant role in Rome's decline, not because Christianity was wrong, but because the shift from civic values to spiritual ones redirected the energy and ambition of Rome's most dedicated citizens away from earthly institutions and toward heavenly salvation. Whether you agree with that argument or not, the broader point stands. Rome lost the cultural glue that had held it together, and without that glue, no amount of military force or administrative reform could prevent the inevitable. When Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, deposed the last Western Roman emperor Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, there were no dramatic last stands, no final battles, no dying speeches. The last emperor of Rome was simply told to leave. He was given a pension and a villa in southern Italy, and he accepted. That quiet, almost bureaucratic ending tells you everything you need to know about what Rome had already become long before that date. The fire had already gone out. 476 AD was simply the moment someone noticed that the ashes were cold. And here is where history stops being comfortable. Because Rome did not fall, because it was weak. It fell because it forgot what had made it strong. It fell because the people entrusted with its protection chose personal gain over collective responsibility. It fell because institutions were hollowed out slowly enough that each individual act of corruption seemed minor, seemed manageable, seemed like something that could be fixed later. And later never came. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, survived for nearly another 1,000 years after the West collapsed. It survived by maintaining stronger institutions, a more stable currency, and a clearer sense of collective identity. It is not a coincidence. It is a lesson. Rome is not ancient history. Rome is a mirror. And when you look into that mirror, you do not see marble columns and gladiators. You see deficits and political paralysis. You see outsourced responsibilities and eroded civic trust. You see a civilization that had every tool it needed to survive and chose, through 1,000 small decisions made by 1,000 individuals who all believed someone else would fix it, not to. The Roman Empire did not fall in 476 AD. It fell in every year that preceded it, in every compromise that went unchallenged, in every institution that was weakened just a little, in every citizen who decided that the empire was someone else's problem. And the most terrifying truth of all is this: every great civilization that has ever existed has stood at exactly that crossroads, and not all of them chose wisely. The question that history is now asking us is whether we will. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and are passionate about this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos and can discover more fascinating stories. See you in the next video.